What's going on, everybody? We are back, episode number 219 of the Club and Sub podcast. This week, we're talking UFC 315 taking place in Montreal, Canada. We got two title fights. We got Belal Muhammad defending his title for the first time against Jack Della Maddalena. And we also have Manon Fior trying to claim the belt from Valentina Shevchenko, who recently won her title back. Decent card. I haven't made any bets on it yet. The one bet I was definitely going to make got scrapped, which was Benoit Saint Denis. But yeah, but before we dive into this, drop a like, guys. Subscribe. We'd appreciate it. Share it if you feel the need to. Yeah. So before we get into it, we can talk about last night briefly. I missed the entire card. I was at a wedding. I did watch some of it back this morning. Broke a 4-event winning streak for me. I lost 5.09 units. Pretty frustrating. I had Juliana Miller for 1.5 units at plus 195. That fight went more or less how I thought. Thought Miller, as she worked into the fight, would just kind of be able to out-grapple her and get her pace going. Miller had Miller round 2 for half a unit plus 1,800 and round 3 for half a unit at plus 2,500. I don't usually go that big on round props, but I really felt like Miller was going to find dominant spots, in this fight, and she did. Would have been nice if she finished it. That would have been a huge night. But unfortunately, she didn't. So it was a small win on that fight. I had 1.5 units on Mays and Thomas Peterson under 2.5 plus 120. That was, yeah. I mean, look, he didn't really get close to finishing the fight at all. I just figured if Peterson was going to get on top of him for 10 or 11 minutes, he probably had a pretty good chance to finish. And I felt if he didn't, he was too hittable. Both guys were too hittable to really think that was going to go to the distance, at a favorite price. But it did go the distance. And then I had the under 2.5 in CD Smotherman at plus 170 for a unit and a half. That also didn't work out. Really good game plan from CD, though, mixing in the grappling as much as he did. And then I had Miesha Tate big. I had 4.02 units on her. And honestly, I don't really have a ton of regrets about it. I mean, if she was going to lose, that's what it was going to look like. I felt like Tate was going to win round 3 at a huge clip. I felt like if she got on top of her at any point, she would dominate. I think both of those played out like I thought they would. I just didn't expect Yana to be able to kind of keep her off her legs as easily as she did for the first 2 rounds. So, yeah, loss on the card, but you know what is what it is. We move on. Cameron saying Jillian KO plus 900 was a beautiful thing. That was a great hit. Bit disappointed I was not on it. I do not know what Lags is doing right now. So I suppose we will just jump right into it. Oh, he's trying to reconnect, but I'm just going to jump in. First fight of the night, UFC 315. We got Daniel Santos. He's taking on Young Lee. Late booking. Santos, a short notice replacement here. Current price, Santos a favorite. Minus 140, comeback on Lee plus 120. I have to look a little bit more at this, but I think it's a pretty interesting bout. I haven't been super high on Lee in the UFC or pre-UFC. He does have good hardware, very physical, hits pretty hard. Seems to be a reasonable grappler, but I also just don't know that he is from a technical perspective, I'm not sure that he operates at a plus level anywhere, and I don't know that his output is really all that great or will be all that great against decent competition, but he's getting Daniel Santos here. And Santos is a guy I have been a fan of just because Daniel Santos fights like a madman, crazy pace, just goes forward, takes shots on the chin pretty well. Even when he gets hurt, he seems to recover really well. Very good counter grappler. The issue with Santos is just the guy is so easy to hit. And I feel like he's playing a dangerous game. And he almost got knocked out a few times by John Castaneda. He got hurt a few times by Julio Arce. I do think it's an inevitability that he's going to get finished one of these days. He's fighting Lee here, and it's an interesting clash of styles because he's going to take the fight to Lee, but I feel like Lee shouldn't have really all that much difficulty finding his power shots here. It's just kind of a question to me there's a few questions for me here. It's one, if Lee doesn't finish him, can Lee hold up under his pace? 2, if Lee can hold up under his pace, can Santos really win minutes? And then the third real big variable in this fight is Santos is going up to 145. He's not a particularly big 135 pounder, and he's fighting a very physical specimen in Junyoung Lee. So I don't know. It's pretty interesting because like I haven't been super high on Lee, but it feels like he's got a full camp here. He is the much bigger fighter. He's got the better hardware of the two. I kind of lean that side. I just feel like Santos, Santos isn't a guy who's going to really ever blow away guys on minutes. Even his biggest win, Castaneda, was just by virtue of him face tanking enough shots for Castaneda to gas himself out. What do you think about this, Lags?
Can you hear me pretty good now?
Yeah, you're good.
I mean, I think this fight's going to be pretty much a war, honestly. Though I favor the Santos side just because I think he probably can put out a little bit more volume. I think he is more durable as well. A bit more proven, too, at this level.
So you think Santos is deserved favorite?
Yeah, I think price is fine where it's at.
Fair enough. Moving on, we have an interesting fight here. We got Modestas Picowskis. He's taking on Ion Coutaba. Current price, Picowskis minus 120. The comeback on Coutaba plus 100. What are your thoughts here, Lex?
It's an easy pass for me. Like, this is two very untrustworthy guys I have awful reads on personally. I lean the Modestas side, though, because I think in the striking, I think his technical advantage, I think, is going to be huge for him just because I think his 3-inch reach advantage is just going to have like longer, straighter shots, going to find the home of Ion. I mean, super hittable on the feet. But yeah, I think it's just a volatile fight.
I'm debating whether or not to bet Coutaba here. I feel like I bet him in his last fight, and it was against a much less proven fighter, Ibo Aslam. But I look at like Picowskis, and he's the better striker. I mean, he's got better footwork. Fights a bit longer than Ion does. But I mean, Modestas hasn't really throughout his UFC career separated from anybody. He's fought some pretty bad fighters very, very close. He also, I don't know if I want to call him chinny, but he's been knocked out a fair few times. The guy does get hurt a fair amount, and he's not a he's not a good grappler at all, really. I mean, obviously on the Coutaba side, he's given away a pretty big striking advantage here, but I think he's got a pretty big hardware edge in this fight. I think he's got a pretty large grappling advantage. I think the entire thing comes down to, this is what always makes it tough with Coutaba fights and why he's always line pick him, is just can his cardio like hold on down the stretch, in this fight if he doesn't finish Modestas early. And I'm not sure. I'm still trying to weigh whether I think it can. But I guess my issue is I feel like Coutaba, and tell me if you disagree, but I feel like he's much more likely of the two to win by knockout.
Yeah, no, I would agree there. No, I agree. But the only thing I would counter, though, to the cardio, no, I shouldn't say counter, really, but just add on to the cardio point is just with that wrestling dynamic, like the wrestling advantage that obviously you think he specifically has in this matchup. Like, yeah, it's tough for him to do that, I think, again, and have that good cardio for 15 minutes. Like, it's not going to be a good game plan.
But I also sort of think Modestas, he's not like a huge volume striker like a Dustin Jacoby or some of the other guys who have really exploited Coutaba's cardio. So I feel like, it could be the kind of thing where like it's just not punished nearly as badly as it might ordinarily be by virtue of Picowskis kind of being happy to play the back foot game. And like when you combine that with just like what I believe is more finishing upside, I do kind of think Coutaba should be a favorite here. Haven't made a firm decision on it yet. I'll probably look at it a little bit more, but I'm leaning the Coutaba side. I feel like, I mean, what's Picowskis' best win, Lags? Like, is it Marcin Prokhnio? Like that? Like literally?
Yeah,
he beat Cerqueira, who's a fake fighter.
Right. I would say it's literally the bottom of the barrel. You got Cerqueira, you have who you just mentioned there, Prokhnio, you had Tyson Pedro, Zach Pauga. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the guy is not really fighting like anybody. Anytime he fights anybody decent, it's like gets lamped by Jimmy Crute in the first round, loses to Olasejic, gets knocked out or gets his knee destroyed by Khalil Roundtree. Like he really like Pauga not in the UFC anymore. Prokhnio I don't think is in the UFC anymore. No. Cerqueira may still be, but he won't be for long if he is. Like this guy is beating regional level fighters. He's not.
He is.
He's not really.
Like I would say Eon's on his level for sure, and like you just mentioned, like Modestas, who he's beating, are like a step below both of those guys. But I don't know, it's tough. Again, like I said, I've had bad reads on Modestas. I bet Pauga at plus 170. Thought he won that fight. I bet Cerquera in his last fight plus 200 gets absolutely lamped. I mean, just awful fighter, but.
Yeah, but like the fact that like you even think we're talking about Pauga. Pauga is awful, man. Like he just lost on to a regional bum recently too. You know, I don't know. I feel like this is. I'm gonna do a little bit more due diligence on it, but I am kind of leaning the Elon side here. Moving on,
Fair
interesting
enough.
fight here. We got Navajo Sterling taking on Ivan Urslan. Urslan lost by split decision to Ion Coutaba in his last fight, his debut. Current price Sterling minus 310. The comeback on Urslan plus 260. Any thoughts here, Lex?
No, to be honest, no. I think Sterling probably should just run through Urslan personally. I think he finds a knockout here. Much harder shots on the feet. He's a physical specimen personally. I think it's just an easy matchup for him.
I tend to agree it's well made for him, but like I don't know, man. I don't think Sterling. I am not entirely sold on him being like some UFC stud yet. You know, the guy's defense seems. But but that's my point. Like Urslan's got 18 pro fights. You know, he was fighting in KSW. He's fought some pretty good competition. He fought Coutaba pretty close. Like I worry with Urslan that he can be a bit fragile, you know, and a bit wilty. Sure. But yeah, I mean, Cam just put it in the chat, like Navajo does fight like too pretty, and I really did not like the way the back end of that Tukos fight looked. Like Tukos is obviously a bit of a different test than Urslan is, but Tukos is, I mean, again, the absolute bottom of the barrel, and when your optics are that bad, you know, against Tukos. I don't see why Ivan Urslan can't beat you. Like, I do think Sterling has a bit more strike diversity, but Urslan's a decent boxer. He's got some pop. I think given the lack of head movement from Sterling, I feel like his jab and cross should be able to find a home a fair amount here. I also think he's the only one of the two that likely has, you know, grappling equity. I am not a fan of Urslan, and it wasn't coming into the UFC, so I'm not sure if I'll play it because like it does seem like, you know, we know what the UFC is doing here, where they're trying to get like Navajo Sterling a highlight reel KO on a pay-per-view. But I don't know. I have a feeling until and unless Urslan gets KO'd, it's going to play pretty close. Like I have a hard time believing Sterling's just going to run away on minutes in this fight. Moving on, though, we have a fun fight here. Well, it could be fun. It could be a mauling. I'm curious to get your take, Lags. We got Jessica Andraj, Bate Estaca. She's back in the octagon. She's taking on Jasmine Javicius. Current price, Jasmine minus 300. The comeback on Andraj plus 250. What are your thoughts?
Can you hear me, John?
Yep, I can hear you.
Here, let me come out and come back in real quick.
All right, I will break this one down then. So, yeah, I mean, I think we all know the dynamic here. It's grappler versus striker. Jasmine, one of the best grapplers in the division. When she can get on top of women, she is just completely elite. Tremendous positional control, tremendous balance. She's great at beating her opponents to the next position when in the grappling. Excellent counter grappler if you try to grapple her. But, you know, despite that, despite the fact that she is fairly high output on the feet, you know, Jasmine is a punching bag. You know, that has not changed at any point in her career. She just walks forward and just eats shots in the face. And something I've always had a bit of I don't want to say an issue with, but I don't think, you know, she's a tremendous grappler, but I do not think she's a tremendous wrestler. You know, her wrestling seems pretty average to below average to me. It's just that, you know, she's a big, strong woman. And so for a lot of these women, she's able to just bully them down to the mat. But, you know, this is a woman who lost round 1 to Ariane Silva. You know, she's dropped rounds to women that aren't that good. And she's taken on Andraj here. Now, Andraj, look, if Jasmine gets Andraj flat in this fight, I think she's probably going to abuse her just because Andraj just isn't really that good on the ground against decent grapplers. And Jasmine will have a huge edge there. But it kind of reminds me of the Dern fight to a degree. Like, Jasmine's a better wrestler than Dern, but I mean, it's kind of similar dynamic in that I don't think Jasmine can just like physically hoss Andraj like very easily. And her getting into that range where she can do that, it could come at a great cost because obviously Andraj hits very, very hard and is much, much faster. And Jasmine is obviously very, very hittable. I also feel like Jasmine is extremely leg kickable, which is something Andraj does very, very well. So I'm torn because I do think the potential downside of Andraj is obviously like subterranean here, as like, look, if it turns out Jasmine can get easy takedown, she's gonna look, minus 1,000. But historically, it hasn't been. The only woman to really get easy takedowns against Andraj was Val, and I don't think Jasmine presents that kind of an issue. So I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think Jasmine's a deserved, like, decent sized favorite. But I do think Andraj, like, I will not be surprised at all if Andraj is able to kind of just stuff the takedowns and beat her up on the feet or finish her on the feet. I also just don't think Andraj, or Jasmine, I'm sorry, is going to be able to just zombie to the front foot the way she typically does. It's kind of hard to do that in the face of power and output that Andraj brings. And if she doesn't do that, she's probably going to be in a lot of trouble if Andraj has got her on the back foot and is like flurrying on her. So I don't know. I lean Andraj at the number. Again, like I said, the thing I'm struggling with and why I haven't bet it is I just feel like if it turns out takedowns do come easy for Jasmine, she's going to win quite easily. So there is a very, very low floor for Andraj here. But I also think, conversely, the ceiling could be quite high. What do you think, Lags?
I actually have Jasmine in a parlay, to be honest, at minus 300. I think where the line's at is value where it's at. It is still value where it's at. I think takedowns are going to come easy for Jasmine. And on the feet, I mean, she is super hittable, but we've come to see that she is very durable, has pretty high volume on the feet as well. I mean, her pace, pressure,
it's crazy.
It's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome to watch.
I am a fan of hers. I do think it's a tricky matchup, though, personally. But moving on, we have a banger fight here, and the rest of these fights, for the most part, are bangers. We got Mike Mallet taking on Charles Radkkey. Current price, Mallet minus 235. The comeback on Radkkey plus 200. I honestly, going into tape, I was like, I'll almost certainly bet Radkkey there, and then I looked at it, and I feel like I kind of think Mallet's going to torch him, to be honest. If Radkkey, Radkey's game, it's good for fighting in close with guys with no footwork. He's a decent pressure boxer with high output, decent power, but he's very soft to the body. He's a bit hittable. I still think his defensive grappling is a bit on the suspect side, to be quite honest. And he's taking on a guy in Mike Mallet who, Mallet is not going to sit there and let him box in the pocket. Mallet's going to move. He's going to look to kick, and he's going to look to grapple. Obviously, you have like the elephant in the room is Mallet's cardio and potentially his mindset. I mean, the way he wilted with 90 seconds left against Magny was like one of the most epic collapses I can ever remember. What was that? I can't hear you. But I feel like Mallet is going to land his body kicks here, quite easily. It wouldn't shock me if he hurts Radkkey to the body. I think he can measure distance a lot more than Radkkey, and I actually think he's got a ton of grappling upside if he can get on top of Radkkey here. Plus, he's fighting at home. I don't know. Look, I think Mallet is not nearly as good as the market was pricing him in the early in his UFC career, but I also feel at this point he's getting treated like anybody with decent cardio is going to run him over, and I think he's got just much, much better skills than Radkkey has here. I think he's going to knock Radkkey out personally. Lags, what do you think? Well, Lags gone. Moving on to the next fight. We got Marc-Andre Barriault, MAB, the power bar. He is taking on Bruno Blindado Silva. Current price, Barriault is minus 145. The comeback on Silva is plus 125. I feel like obviously the big question in this fight to me really comes down to just where you think Barriault's chin is at. He's been knocked out 2 fights in a row. He's a guy that has relied very, very, very heavily on his durability throughout his career. And obviously guys like that, when their durability starts to go, it goes all at once. And yeah, so I have big concerns about Marc-Andre Barriault's durability. I mean, the guy just got iced by Dustin Stoltzfus, which is pretty scary, especially taking on a guy like Bruno Silva, who's got some pop in his hands. At the same time, though, I do think it's potentially being overstated a bit. He got knocked out by Pyfer 2 fights ago. Don't really care about that. Piper's a huge hitter. Obviously, he got KO'd by Stoltzfus, but it was a pretty wild exchange. And, he got clipped flush on the chin. And then like 2 fights prior to that, he fought Chris Curtis. He dealt with the power fine there. He came on hard at the end of that fight and almost won it. So I look at this fight and, Bruno Silva, obviously he's fought some decent competition, but like Bruno Silva hasn't won other than knocking out Brad Tavares. The guy hasn't won a round in like almost 5 years. He's a terrible round winner. His form recently has been abysmal. I mean, this is a guy who got destroyed striking by Gerald Mearshart. He got destroyed striking or destroyed everywhere by Ismail Nordiev. He got destroyed striking last year by a totally washed out Chris Weidman. I look at Silva and I feel like, there was a time when, you can make an argument. Maybe he's a top 15, 20 guy. I never totally bought into it just because his process was always so KO reliant. But you look at him in recent years, and outside of the Tavares fight, it doesn't even really seem like he's like hurting guys anymore and like really landing, big power shots at this point. Like Chris Weidman dealt with his shots fine. Shara dealt with his shots fine. Nordiev as well. And, could he hurt and kill Marc-Andre Barriault? Sure. But I also feel like this market might be overpricing where Barriault's chin is and underpricing just how washed Bruno Silva is. Like he's lost 6 of his last 7 fights. Of those 6 losses, it's kind of funny to say it, but the most competitive one was the Alex Pereira fight. He just hasn't been competitive. Weidman owned him. Nordiev owned him. Shara owned him. Brandon Allen owned him. It's pretty crazy to me. So I look at it and I'm like, yeah, it's hard to trust Barriault's chin, but like Barriault's chin could be done and he could still wash, Bruno Silva here. Or he could have just gotten knocked out in one reckless exchange and by a huge hitter, and his chin could be fine and he looks like minus 400. Because the truth is, even though I think Silva could have a good round 1 here, once Barriault's game starts getting going against the guy with Silva's gas tank and in his form recently, I just don't see how it doesn't snowball downhill insanely hard and fast. So, yeah, I guess I say all of this to say, yes, I have concerns about Marc-Andre Barriault's chin. However, I think it's pretty clear that Bruno Silva is the much more shot fighter of the two. His only real upside in this fight is likely going to be a KO or having like huge moments. I'm going to probably end up getting to a Barriault bet, to be honest. I feel like the implied price, given what we've seen from Silva recently, is just too short. Like saying Barriault's under 60% against a guy who got outboxed in the year of our Lord 2024 by Chris Weidman is a little silly to me. Ted saying in chat, Bruno no scorecards. I think that's an interesting look. I mean, because that's how he's going to do it. Or, maybe just like I saw the under 1.5 is plus 160. Maybe pair the under up with like, the Barriault side if you want, or just bet the under. Because I mean, Bruno could just melt himself here. But moving on, we got Brad Katona. He's taking on Beckzat Almacan. Current price, Almacan is minus 175. The comeback on Katona is plus 150. It's an interesting fight. I don't really know what to make of Beckzat yet. Obviously he comes from, the Kazakh regional scene. He debuted against Umar, kind of briefly wobbled Umar, but prior to that had basically been fighting, really nobody in Eastern Europe and winning fights. It was undefeated going into that fight, I believe. Or no, it was 10-1 going into it. And we didn't learn much from the Umar fight because getting mauled by Umar Nurmagomedov doesn't tell us much. I guess I would consider Beckzat or a average-ish striker and probably been an average-ish grappler as well. He seemed to like to grapple a lot regionally, but I'm not totally convinced he can really get that game going at this level against anyone decent. In the striking, he'll probably be competitive with a lot of guys in this division here. He's got some power in his hands. It wouldn't shock me if he's able to, win a bunch of fights on the back of his striking. But again, I also don't think it's all that good. So I think his upside is limited. But he's fighting Brad Katona, and like I bet Katona in his last fight against Sean Matsumoto, he gave a good account of himself. But like the problem with Brad, look, Brad's a very well-rounded generalist, right? Decent grappler, decent striker, high output, good cardio. The problem is just, Brad's not a very good wrestler, so he has a hard time getting jiu-jitsu going, and he's harmless. That's really the biggest problem. Like he doesn't hurt anybody. The guy throws a ton of output, but like there's really nothing to be afraid of coming back from him. So, like, you have a fight here, and, Katona he's the more experienced fighter. He's fought a bit higher level of competition in the aggregate. He's beaten better competition. But again, as with every Brad Katona fight, he's probably going to be fighting here on like very, very thin margins. And, Beck could win a close fight on Katona's thin margins. He could knock Katona out. He could win it on moments. He could potentially maybe have a little bit of grappling success, though I'm kind of skeptical. But yeah, I just look at it and I see a lot more. I shouldn't say I see more upset at the price, but I understand the price. Like, it's with Katona's build against a guy with reasonable power who can grapple. It's just hard for him to be better than plus 150. He presents no real threats, So I lean Beck's out. I think the price at the moment is fine. Moving on, we got what'll probably be the most boring fight of the evening. We got Jose Aldo taking on Ayman Zahabi. Current price, Aldo minus 215. The comeback on Zahabi plus 185. Two counter boxers here. I'd expect output to be very, very, very low in this fight. I mean, look, at the end of the day, you have Aldo, who is much better at, this style of fighting than Zahabi is. So there is some credence for the number being what it is. But, I mean, kind of to the point that I just mentioned, minus 215 for a fight that's probably going to be extremely tentative and low volume against the guy in Zahabi, who is a skilled counter striker. It seems a bit on the seems a little bit on the wide side. I don't know if I want to do business with Zahabi, but I feel, Tim's saying total strikes over under 45.5. Like, that's kind of how I feel. And in this kind of a fight, it's like one or two hard shots could easily swing around or the fight. Plus, you have, they're both, Zahabi isn't young. I believe he's like 36, but much less 37, much less wear and tear on his body. Whereas Aldo, you have a guy who has clearly been diminished for some time. He's 38 years old. He hasn't been in the best form in a while. Even his most recent win against Jonathan Martinez, he looked solid, but it was like a tailor-made matchup for him, and it wasn't like he was blowing him away on margins. So, yeah, I mean, I probably won't bet it because I do think, even this version of Aldo probably has, a big enough skill edge to justify being a moderate favorite. But I think it'll probably play close, and it'll probably be boring, and it's probably a good fun time to go and, grab a drink. Moving on, we got Alexa Grasso taking on Natalia Silva. Current price, Silva minus 228. The comeback on Grasso, plus 193. Natalia Silva probably, not even probably at this point, she's the best prospect in the division. I think most people, and probably deservedly so, expect her to be the champion at some point. Very good defensive wrestler, very good footwork, good volume striker, does a great job of landing and, moving before anybody can get anything off back at her. Very strong kicker. Yeah, I mean, she's great. She's 6-0 in the UFC. There aren't really, I guess the only big flaws I would say that are in her game is she's not much of an offensive grappler, and I don't think she's going to, she has a couple KOs early on against like Victoria Leonardo and Teresa Bleda, but I don't think she's going to be hurting and knocking out many women up in the top 5 personally. I just taken on Alexa Grasso, who's obviously coming off a dreadful performance against Valentina Shevchenko, where she lost her title. It's obviously fresh in everyone's mind. But the way that fight went down, I mean, I don't think should have been as surprising to, the market and us as, UFC enjoyers and bettors, because Grasso's had issues on bottom her entire career. Everyone that takes her down holds her down for the most part. Will Silva take her down? Maybe she'll mix that in, but she hasn't really shown too much interest in doing that, and I don't think Grasso would really have too much issue at keeping her off her. And Grasso at her core, she's a pressure boxer. She wants to go forward, she wants to jab, and she wants to throw volume and throw power shots. It's an interesting matchup here, in my opinion. Like, I feel Silva is a bit more skilled than Grasso. I expect her to maybe get off a bit more volume than Grasso does, and maybe kind of neuter some of Grasso's pressure with her footwork. But I do think, Grasso is by far the toughest test Silva's had in the UFC to date. Grasso also probably has an advantage in that, she's likely going to be thrown to the head a lot more often than Silva is here. Yeah, Tim just said in the chat, like, Silva, she didn't have the easiest time with Viviane Araújo. And, I mean, Grasso had a pretty competitive fight with her as well. But I do think there is something to be said here for, Grasso relying on volume and head strikes against Silva, who's going to be throwing a lot more kicks and whatnot, because head strikes do just in the aggregate tend to score a bit better. I like Silva more. I like her more as a prospect. I think she's a more skilled fighter. But I think Grasso's going to make this pretty competitive. I also think you can't be understated just like how big a step up this is for, Silva. Like, I know she beat Andraj, and I know she beat Vivi, but Grasso is far better than either of them at this point in her career. I mean, she was just minus 140 or minus 130 to the current champion in her last fight. Now she's plus 200 here. Maybe Silva justifies it. It wouldn't really surprise me. I mean, I am super high on her, and I think she very likely will be champion one day. But I just have a hard time, unless you're telling me Silva's going to wrestle, I have a very hard time picturing Silva just like easily outstriking her. Like, no one has really easily outstruck Alexa Grasso in the UFC, other than Shevchenko in their first fight. But I mean, Shevchenko's arguably the best striker in the history of the division. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to be a pretty close fight. I'm pretty interested in Grasso here. I may eventually make a bet there. I just feel like it's a perfect storm of you have a fighter who's undefeated in the UFC, who's an elite prospect, who's now taking a huge step up on a pay-per-view, fighting a woman who was just champion, but who looked horrible, and everybody is now down on. So yeah, I'll pick Grasso here. I think it's going to be close, but I think her pressure and her being on the front foot could really swing this in the eyes of the judges. Moving on, we got Valentina Shevchenko taking on Manon Fior. Current price, Fior is minus 163. The comeback on Valentina, plus 143. Honestly, I think the line's fine. I considered betting Fior when it was minus 110. Can't really get there now at this price. Apologies. But Shevchenko, to me, look, she's one of the best to ever do it. She's the elite of the elite. She's a future Hall of Famer. But I also think it's been clear for some time that she's declining. Like, even in the stand-up, she had some moments where she was finding her counters against Grasso and outstriking her in their first fight. But to me, across all three of those fights, and even going back to the fight before that, with Tyler Santos, I feel like she's just gotten noticeably slower. She's not taking damage nearly as well. Her strike speed is slower. She's not cutting off the cage as well. The way she's winning these fights these days is mostly leaning on her wrestling. And she's taking on Manon Fior here, who is a really, really good kickboxer. Has just absolutely insane metrics, measures distance great, has incredible footwork, very, very fast. Yeah, Tim said Val's defensive striking is significantly worse now. I agree with that completely. And I just think Fior's going to have a pretty easy time on the feet here. Maybe I'm underrating Val at this point in her career. And maybe I shouldn't say easy time, but I do expect Fior to land. Yeah. Yeah, Seb's saying, I just said Grasso, she dominated Grasso standing, and she was one of the best strikers in the history of MMA. I do think that, but I also think, she's pretty clearly declined. Like, if you look at those fights, she was winning most exchanges with Grasso, but she got hurt multiple times by her, which is like, Grasso's not a big hitter, and it was kind of like worrisome to me. And like I said, I think she's just a lot slower than she used to be, and I think Fior, for better or worse, whatever you think about her style can be pretty ugly, but Fior does throw a ton of volume, and she's very, very good at mitigating volume coming back at her, which is pretty tough to do when you throw as much as she does. So to me, the entire question of this fight really, I shouldn't say the entire question. Like, Valentina could win a striking fight. Don't get me wrong, but I think the biggest question in terms of how to handicap the price really just comes down to how you think the grappling is going to go. And it's really why I'm not making a bet here at this price, because I don't know. Maybe it's possible Valentina can come out here. I shouldn't say maybe. It is possible Valentina can go lock her up in the body lock, take Fior down, control her, dominate the fight. It wouldn't shock me, but it would surprise me a little bit just because, for one, Fior is huge. She's very, very big. She's very, very strong. Yeah, Cameron just said it too in the chat. She does a decent job of digging underhook. She's hard to clinch up. I mean, you just saw that with Erin Blanchfield in her last fight. I also think Fior off bottom isn't nearly as bad as she was, early in her career. I think she's much better than Grasso is off her back. And so I do think, unless she's giving up, body triangles, kind of similar to what happened in the Tyler Santos fight, which honestly it could happen. Jennifer Maia almost got to Fior's back. So if Valentina is getting back takes and body triangles, I wouldn't be shocked. But I do think unless she's getting those positions, Fior's likely going to work up. And I think it's going to be very, very hard for Valentina to just deal with the pace that Fior's going to push in terms of total output. So, yeah, my gut instinct here is Fior's going to win and we're going to crown a new champion. I do think Valentina is the better fighter, but I just think I think she's clearly at the end of her run. Now, does that mean it'll end here? Maybe not, but I think it's fairly obvious that Valentina is not the fighter that she was when she won the title, however long ago it was, 5 years ago for the first time. Moving on, we got Belal Muhammad taking on Jack Della Maddalena. Very interesting fight. Obviously, very big contrast to styles here. Maddalena, one of the most fun and exciting young fighters in the sport right now. Very good boxer, hits the body well, a lot of pressure, a lot of volume. Seems to be able to take a shot pretty well. A lot of power. Seems to have great cardio. I have bet against Shaq a bunch, and I've been very, very wrong in the aggregate about it. He has, he's legit. The biggest question with Jack, though, and I still have this question, is his defensive grappling. I will say this. I think he's made fairly clear improvements in the defensive grappling since we first saw him in the UFC. Like, he looked a lot more comfortable grappling with Burns, for instance, than he did with like Andalusa on Contender Series, or even on bottom with Basil Hafez. So it's obviously something he's been working on, and I'd expect him to continue to show improvements there here. But obviously in Belal Muhammad, he's getting a guy who is just a really, really excellent grappler on his own right. He dominated Leon Edwards in their last fight. Similar, not quite as dominant as Sean Brady was against him, but he did win that fight fairly solidly. Guy's a very good wrestler. He's got very good jiu-jitsu, pushes a very heavy pace, has great cardio. But again, to me, it's just going to come down to how long or short Belal gets on the ground with Jack. Because I do think, while Bilal's a decent striker, I think he's going to be pretty outgunned firepower-wise here on the feet. Jack's volume just going to be too much. And I also just think the moment and finishing equity on the feet is night and day. It just favors Jack massively. So it all is going to come down to whether or not Belal can get his wrestling going. And I do think he can. And I am going to pick him to win this fight just because, like, look, I mean, you dominate Leon Edwards, or you beat Leon Edwards that way. I shouldn't say dominate. The fight was a lot closer, I think, than people gave it credit for. But you beat Leon Edwards in the fashion that he did. I have a very, very hard time projecting Jack to be a better defensive grappler than Leon Edwards. Cook Combat saying Belal has no ground and pound, though. Yeah, he doesn't ground and pound all that much. That is true. And again, that's one of the interesting dynamics about this fight is it could be the kind of thing where it's like Jack gives up 2.5 minutes on the ground in a round and is stealing rounds off of big shots because Belal is just not doing enough on top. But yeah. So, I mean, but like in general, though, like if you're trying to like put a probability on it, I feel like it's really hard to like cap this too close just since, Belal obviously has hypothetically huge upside here. Whereas I guess Jack has hypothetically huge upside too if he can keep the fight standing. But like, is there any real reason that we should think that Jack can keep the fight standing for 25 minutes? I don't. Like, I'd expect him to continue to get better, but I do expect that over the course of this fight, he's probably going to give up somewhere between 3 and 5 takedowns in all likelihood. So it'll probably come up to how his get-up game goes here. I don't know. I'm still having a hard time picking a side, and I'll pick Belal to win just because I think the grappling upside here, plus his 5-round experience, his championship experience, I think all favor him pretty heavily. Obviously, it's Jack's first title fight. But yeah, I keep thinking about it. And I'm like, man, like Belal could get 12 minutes here and lose this fight, have control and lose this fight. It wouldn't be that hard to see if Jack is like landing big shots on him on the feet. But yeah, I think there's a lot of uncertainty in it. And I think most of the certainty in this fight is that Bilal's got a big grappling edge. And I think that's pretty baked into the price here. So like, I don't think there's any value on Belal. If anything, I think the potential of Jack continuing to make improvements and getting better, could maybe imply some value there on the Jack side. I am kind of like, I've been thinking about, whether or not it might be worth it to, to take the under here, which is under 4.5 is plus 122 or plus 115, I should say, just because I think if JDM is on the feet for a long period of time, he's got a very good chance to knock Belal out. And if Bilal dominates this fight or even pays off his price, he's probably going to have some opportunities to finish JDM on the mat. But I haven't made any firm decisions with it. I guess my ultimate view is Bilal should be favored here. He deserves that. I do think at the price, there's more upside on the JDM side than there is on the Bilal side. But I am probably not going to do business with it. I will be in attendance, though. And since Lags left the show early today because he still can't get his internet going, I will have we'll have a little contest out there this week. We'll put $200 on the line. We'll have, maybe it'll be Lags' parlay contest, but keep an eye out for that on the club and sub Twitter. Lags will tweet it out probably tomorrow. We'll put it out there, and hopefully someone will win some money from us. Ted B saying, how honest was he about striking with JDM? I didn't know Bilal said that. I mean, he's definitely not honest about it. He didn't strike at all with Leon. I cannot imagine he's going to be spending much time striking with JDM here. But yeah, guys, thanks for coming out tonight. Sorry for the technical difficulties once again. I swear we'll get it under control one of these weeks. Drop a like, subscribe, share it. It would help us out a lot. And yeah, I think me and Sean may do another Combat and Cocktails this week, so keep an eye out for that. We'll have some fun. We'll chat last weekend's card a bit, talk about this weekend's card. But yeah, guys, hope you all enjoyed the show. Follow, fade, whatever you want to do. Good luck on your bets this weekend. Peace.